I've been working on bosses and mini bosses for Gunmetal Arcadia 0 for the last week and a half, and as of last night I've finished all of the primary bosses. I think I still have 2 or 3 mini bosses left to do over the weekend, but it's almost done. After that I'm going to move on to doing tile sets, and then sort of populating and decorating every level, and this game is getting close to being done. I think I'm seven weeks out from launch now, something like that. I don't remember, but yeah, it's getting pretty close. And one of those weeks is going to be spent at GDC, so I'm not doing any development that week. But today I'm going to be taking a look at one of the bosses in particular, one that had some sort of interesting functionality, and I'll sort of talk through what went into designing and implementing that. So I'm going to switch over to my left monitor again. Let's see, so this is going to be the 3rd level, I think, 3rd or 4th level, and it's going to be sort of out in the wilderness somewhere, and you'll come to the end of this level and you'll fight this thing. So this is like a robot that's gone rogue. It's not part of the Unmade Empire, it's like elf technology that has turned bad. And it follows sort of a little bit of a video game cliche of that it creates clones of itself, and you have to destroy the clones because they'll keep spitting bullets at you. And once you've destroyed both of them, then it has a chance to do the same thing all over again. So it's just going to be sort of managing enemy position, making sure that the clones are not shooting you, but you can also sort of try to game it so that if you keep only one clone on screen, then it can never spawn more. So yeah, there's a little bit of strategy there. I'm still getting the tuning down, as far as how much health this guy has, how much damage he does, how frequently he shoots bullets, all those sorts of things. I'm still figuring that out. Right now I think it's a little bit too frustrating. It's a little bit too easy to take damage, just unavoidable damage. So yeah, there's a little bit of tuning that needs to happen, but I'm pretty happy with where the implementation is right now. So, well, I guess I'll go ahead and kill this thing first, just so finish the loop here. So yeah, you kill this thing, and of course it drops the heart container, because the bosses always drop a heart container, and you'll go on to the next level. But yeah, let's take a look at what went into making this guy. So the boss is placed here in the level. Some of the other things around here, there's a checkpoint where as soon as the boss dies, it checkpoints you there, just in case, for instance, one of the clones sticks around and kills you after you've already killed the boss. You won't have to do the whole fight over again, because it will have checkpointed you right there. There's an item placer, or item spawner up here for the heart container, and when the boss dies it triggers that. And then there's a few spawn points here. And what this guy does, I'll go ahead and open his markup here. He flies around. He follows mostly the same logic as some of the other flying enemies I've done. There are little eyeballs that will fly around and shoot bullets at you. So he's based on one of those, but with some logic to make him work like a boss. So he does the extra flashing particle effects when he dies and all that stuff. But to do the thing where he stops and teleports himself and spawns clones, I ended up doing that as a little bit of a code side hack. As much as possible, I try to always implement things in generic ways using this sort of markup based, I call it like a scripting language, but it's all just XML markup where there's like a series of actions that AI entities can choose to run in sequence. But so what this guy does is he chooses this behavior, and this is the behavior that will tell him to slow down and stop and teleport and create clones. So he stops anything else he's doing, he brakes to a stop over half a second, waits half a second before doing anything else, kills his velocity completely, waits another half second, plays a sound, starts a timer, and this flashing variable and this teleport flash timer are sort of related to each other, and that this flashing property tells it whether the timer needs to keep going, and that basically just toggles his visibility off and on every fraction of a second. And then he disables his collision, so while he's flashing out, he can't take any damage, he can't cause any damage. Waits a little bit longer, plays a teleport animation, and that's where he sort of gets that static fuzz look. And then we come to this thing, action text equals Orbis hack. So this character, his name is Valkyrie. In code and in entities, I've referred to him as Orbis because I hadn't picked a name for him yet. Or her, I guess. Valkyries were women, weren't they? Anyway, it's a robot, so it's an it. Yeah, I have this Orbis hack action. And this is where basically it just defers to native C++ code to do the repositioning and spawning of the clones. After that, it stops the teleport animation, it plays the teleport animation again after teleporting, but then waits a little while, stops the animation, stops flashing, and re-enables its collision and its renderables if it needs to, in case it had been invisible based on the flashing. Waits another half second and starts flying again. So this whole thing here is basically that sequence of events. Slow to a stop, start flashing, play an animation, teleport, spawn clones, and re-enable everything again. But it's this bit here where it sort of defers to native code that's kind of interesting. I guess I'll come over to here. Like I said, I tried to do as much as possible just in generic terms using this markup, and I do have ways that I could spawn other entities, so I could spawn the clone versions of this thing through this markup. The problem I had was that I didn't have a way to say, I have 3 spawn points. I want to pick one to teleport myself to, and then I want to spawn clones at the other 2. That was just a little bit too specific. So what this code over here does essentially is it sort of encapsulates that same behavior, just with a little bit of extra logic thrown on top. It searches the level for anything that has a tag called Orbis spawn point, and if I go back to the editor here, where I had these spawn points placed in the level, they do have that Orbis spawn point tag on there. So this find entity used by tag function will search the current room or search for any actively created entities that have that tag. There should always be 3 of those, so I have an optional assert for that. And then I have spawn components and RNG components on the active thing, which the context here, for these sorts of actions, I can pass in a handle to basically anything to be the context actor, and in this case it's going to be the primary Orbis entity. So it has a spawn component, which allows it to create other things, and then it has an RNG component, which allows it to roll random numbers in deterministic or non-deterministic fashion. So using this RNG component, it selects one of the spawn points. It picks a random number of 3 with a minimum of 0 using an RNG name, which basically is a way to flag whether it wants to use a deterministic or non-deterministic roll. In this case, it's non-deterministic. This is one of the few times where enemy behavior is not deterministic. Normally, you enter a room and enemies will always behave the same way. They'll always start by using the same attack. They might choose different attacks after that based on how the player has responded to those, but as long as the player always does the same thing, the enemies will always react the same way. And this is one of the few cases where I didn't want to do that. This thing is very deliberately always non-deterministic. You cannot predict where it's going to be. So it chooses a random number of 3, and that's going to be the location of the spawn point that it teleports to. Then it spawns 2 clones of itself. This do autonomous spawn. This goes back to, let's see, somewhere in the markup here. Yeah, so this is the markup that represents that spawn component. It has a template, Orbis clone, so that's the type of entity that it's going to try to spawn. This tag actually I don't think is used. Some of this information was related to other ways that I can spawn things that ended up not panning out for this particular implementation. I just haven't cleaned those up yet. Same thing with like first spawn, next spawn. Those are like durations for timers for things that just automatically spawn things over time. Like when you have like the Medusa heads flying through levels, those are just on a timer. So those aren't used, and in fact this Orbis hack thing here, that's also not used. The thing that really matters is this template. That tells it what it wants to spawn when I do this do autonomous spawn function. So it creates 2 clones, and then it finds this spatial component. This is what would normally be called like a transform component, just represents a position and rotation in space. So it finds the transform components of the spawn point handles. So that's going to be the locations that things can spawn. Then it creates a list of available slots, removes the one that's already selected, so it cannot put the clones in those spots. Then it gets the transform components for itself and for the clones, moves itself to the spawn point they had previously selected, moves the first clone to the first available one, and moves the second clone to the second available one. So that's how everything gets spawned and moved into position. Then, going back to the editor, if we look at the markup for the clone, this is based on the primary Orbis body, the boss, but with some additional markup. So when this thing spawns, is this on fully loaded script. Actually, that's not even the one this is the one. It has this on fully loaded script, so where it tells itself to run a behavior called initial pause. And if I come down to the AI component and look for a behavior, this behavior has a weight of 0, which means that it can never be selected at random when the AI is just going, okay, I've finished my current behavior, let's choose another one to run. But it has a name, which means that other things can, trigger this behavior. For instance, Y was just showing where it initially loads and just tells it to go ahead and run this. So what this does is basically it keeps it frozen in place and sort of matches the same effects that the boss itself is doing as it comes out with that teleport. It kills any sort of flying, does the same sort of like teleport flash, teleport animation, and then after some duration, it enables itself again and starts flying around. So by doing this here, this sort of makes the clones match up with what the boss is doing, so they look like they're all doing the same thing. You can't tell which one is the boss, which one are the clones. And yeah, other than that, basically these things just fly around and shoot bullets occasionally. Basically they are almost identical to the little flying eyeball enemies, just a little bit larger. And they take 1 hit to kill, and they do have a chance to drop loot, so they can drop hearts and stuff, so you can sort of keep your health up as you're fighting the boss. But yeah, that's I guess this was the last of the main bosses that I was working on. I wanted to sort of try to get one last sort of cool, it's a little bit of a video game cliche, but get one last cool little feature in there. The final boss I'm not going to be showing at all until the game ships. It's actually, I think, a little bit simpler, but that was my intent. I wanted it to be just a very sort of simple, elegant boss fight, and I'm really happy with how that one turned out too. So once the game is out and I can talk about the final boss, I will probably go into a little bit more detail about that and show some of the designs and stuff. But yeah, I guess that's probably it for this week's episode. Like I said, I'm mostly done with bosses. By the time this video goes up, I should be done with all the mini bosses, and which means at that point I'm done with basically all of the enemies for the entire game. I just need to actually go through every level, populate them, figure out which enemies go where, do any sort of enemy variants, where enemies have different palette swaps, different amounts of health. At some point, finish designing all the sub-weapons. That's probably going to be the last sort of big content add I do, is weapons and sub-weapons. And then yeah, just decorate every level and kick this thing out the door, because it's getting very, very close. As always, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. This series is supported through Patreon. Thank you to everyone who is already supporting me on there. You can find the links for that below this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.